Benfica have only lost 2 games all season long, and one of those was on penalties, and a cup in Portugal doesn't matter. And that includes playing in the Champions League, where they finished top of a group, including PSG and Juventus, 2 very famous teams. And now in Portugal, in the Primeira Liga, they are 8 points clear with a plus 48 goal difference, flying high, and they look really good. But are they so good that they might win the Champions League? So Roger Schmidt plays a 4-2-3-1 that becomes a 4-4-2 when Rafa Silva kind of joins this last line. And he tends to be, even though he starts as a 10, he's often on the last line of attack to score goals. That's what he does. And what you get are these key personnel that are in here. Gonçalo Ramos scored a hat-trick at the World Cup, remember him? He's a top scorer in the league, he's got 15 goals, joint with João Mario having the season of his life, great player this season. On the other side, you've got Arsnes, who plays on the left side. Now, the profile player is interesting because Ramos is more of a goal poacher, goal scorer, that's what he does. Silva is more like a direct runner, he likes to get in behind the last man, that's what he likes to do. Whereas the 2 wide forwards aren't dribblers, they're not wingers, they're more players who can pass the ball and help with almost like build-up or approach play in the final third. So that's what they do, because they are then overlapped by fullbacks who do provide the dribbling and the width. All the width comes from these guys, all the narrowness, the compactness and the attacking drive comes from the centre of the pitch. Now Grimaldo has more assists than any player in the Primeira Liga this season, he's got 8. He's been excellent, one of the best left-backs in Europe. Then you've got the 2 centre-backs who can both play with the ball. Otamendi can make mistakes, but Antonio Silva is a youth graduate from the academy, great player, like the next Ruben Dias basically is what you got. And he can play a pass, which helps them build out from the back. And that's relevant because their goalkeeper is also very good at building out from the back. Good shot stopper, but really good with his feet. And that's relevant because Benfica love to play with the ball. They keep possession. They have more possession than any team in Portugal. They also do this in the Champions League, which is very relevant. So what they have is great individual players. Ramos, really, really strong player. João Mario having the season of his life. Then you've got a solid midfield too. Florentino's a bit like a kind of Kanté player this season. Chiquinho's covered for Enzo Fernandez, who is a huge loss. So this big long winning streak and unbeaten streak that Benfica have, a lot of it was done with Enzo Fernandez in the midfield, and he's really key because when you put into context how Benfica play and where they play, basically only 3 teams ever win that Portuguese league. It's only ever Benfica, Sporting or Porto. That's it. That's the only ones. And so naturally everyone else is a lot worse. Braga are okay. So then what you get is that lots of teams sit in a deep block. So they sit back and are deep against these sorts of teams, which means the way you have to break down these sorts of teams is different to how you might break down teams in the Champions League. So if a really good team is trying to press you high up the pitch, obviously they will leave lots more space between their lines so you can play through. So when you play lovely passes with a player like Chiquinho, who's replaced what Enzo Fernandez was doing, he might be able to play these lovely Hollywood passes out wide, switch the play, or fire through lines to someone like Ramos high up the pitch so you can get the play from back to front really quickly. But when you play against a team who's sitting deep, they're always building from the back here, but what they tend to do is they always get past this first line, and then what you are faced with is a team trying to block you and making sure you can't get past them. And so that's when someone like Enzo Fernandez is also very important, because he was able, as we said, to switch the play. And when you switch the play, you force the whole team to move one side. And in these transitional shifts, you might then create a little bit of space between, say, these 2 players here, which then means when the ball's shifted over, Arsnes might find the ball over here to Ramos or to Rafa Silva, who's rotating him. Basically, Benfica in Portugal push high up the pitch, they win the ball high up the pitch like Schmidt's teams do, then they keep all the possession. Then when they get to the final third, what happens is that they'll be joined, they'll keep this narrow diamond, it's always a diamond like this, with fullbacks who'll join in wide areas. Then you protect the rest of the pitch with players like Florentino, Chiquinho, and obviously the centre-backs, that's what they do. And then they'll create chances by putting the ball into the box for someone like Ramos. But what you'll see often is that you'll have someone like this left side here, maybe Arsnes will move over to this left side, and he might end up, because Ramos will make a run over here, he'll be able to set up Rafa Silva making the run through, or he'll set up someone like João Mario at the back post like this, because this diamond, let's give you the diamond, it's a bad diamond, but that's what they do. They'll constantly rotate. They'll always move around, and you'll get lots of rotations, and lots of players will end up in places you might not expect them. Interesting that a lot of goals are scored by Ramos. He's top scorer in the league, joint with João Mario, like we said, because what often happens is that Rafa Silva is the furthest forward player when they get the ball into the box, and Ramos is slightly further behind him. So what you'll get is, in this narrow diamond, the ball will come in from wide, maybe from here, but it won't go to Rafa Silva on the first line, it'll go to Ramos slightly further behind him. And you'll see this happen quite a lot. I'll show you what it looks like. It looks a bit like this example here against Juventus. Here they are. Here's Rafa Silva, who should be the 10, you'd think, going to be the furthest forward player. He scores the goal here, and that is Gonzalo Ramos, the top scorer, who is slightly further behind him. Then obviously you've got the two wide players. Right, so that's roughly how Benfica play, and obviously it changes from team to team. Now Schmidt's team are playing very well, but in Portugal, they are one of the best teams. They've got brilliant individual players, so they naturally have a talent advantage over the rest of the league. At the moment, they're playing in a way that works. They can take the risk of pressing high to win the ball whether they want to, because they know they have players in place that can then have fun with it. But in the Champions League, it's different because they are not the clear and away favourite team. They're not one of the best teams in the entire competition, really, on paper. So it's interesting to me, I should say, that when they played against Juventus, they played with this style of play, the high press, pushing them back, trying to keep possession of the ball. They had over 55% possession, I think, of the ball in their games against Juventus. High scoring games, they beat them 4-3 in one, they beat them in the other, I can't remember what the score was, but they also drew with PSG twice, home and away. And rather than having all the ball, they sat deeper, more of a block, so they could try and hit them on the counter-attack, knowing that PSG naturally would open up, the front three wouldn't do any tracking whatsoever, because that's what PSG do, and they'll never win the Champions League. That's another point for another day. And so then what you get is Benfica can hit with their narrow front four, not concede too much space, make sure they're solid at the back, so they've got these sorts of players here, and then they can take advantage of any momentary lapses in defence that PSG offered them. So they can adapt. And this is one thing about Benfica. They're not a counter-attack team. They're not a possession team. They can do all of it. So they have tactical decisions to make, depending on who they get drawn against. If they go and press a team like Man City, they'll pass through them. That's bad. If they get drawn against someone who they're maybe equal to, you could say someone like Inter Milan, perhaps. If they're through, I'm recording that before this happens, so I don't know. Then they can play in a different way and more the style that Benfica wanted to play. And this is one of the things, like how do Benfica, a team who have nowhere near the money of a team like Man City or Real Madrid, how are they competing at this level and doing so well this season? It's just a bit of luck. Well, Benfica make a lot more money than you might think, and they've developed this uncanny knack of unearthing hidden gems from around world football. So they search in places like Serbia and Norway and Argentina and Brazil, obviously huge countries with great footballers, but they look for players who aren't ready to play for those teams yet, like Real Madrid, develop them so they are, and then they sell them on. Angel Di Maria went to Benfica, did really well, went to Real Madrid, became a superstar. That's the sort of thing that happens. This season alone, they sold Fernandes and Nunez for a big profit, and they do it every single year. This is them since 17-18 just. They've done it for years and years and years. So much money has been made by identifying talent, developing it, selling it on. So they're able to then buy players each year that they can then take at that level, the Portuguese level, the league level, and then develop it to become even better. So at the moment they've got some players who are right there. Gonzalo Ramos is one, Antonio Silva, and then Silva and Ramos are a really good example because they come from the academy. And Benfica's academy is one of the best in the world, right? We always think of Barcelona and Ajax. That's the teams who produce all these players because they have a Barcelona and an Ajax style of play. It's very clear. Benfica don't have a clear style of play. They just have really good players and they tend to win leagues. That's what they do. And so then you bring players through the academy. There's a great video on this on the Athletics channel. The Athletic had access to Benfica's youth academy and were walked through, shown how the things works. They keep the same sort of staff in place for years. The person in charge of the under-19s has been there since under-12s. He's been in charge for about 15 years. They know how the system works and what sort of players should come through. Every player that comes to that academy should be able to play in 3 positions. So like Ruben Dias, another example, came through. He started as a striker, went to midfielder, became a defender, now he's at Man City. You've got Bernardo Silva, can play anywhere on the pitch. He plays at Man City. You've got João Cancelo as a theme developing here, who can play anywhere basically on the pitch. They learn how to be great footballers at Benfica because great footballers win games. And so what you've got is excellent footballers coming through a youth academy who can then either be used to make the team strong that year and try and compete for something like the Champions League, or they can sell them for profit and maintain their dominance at the top of the league alongside Sporting and Porto. So can this Benfica team, who I really like watching, actually really take on the Champions League and win it? Well, I thought they were great against PSG. I thought they were excellent against Juventus. But what you see in this Benfica team is a versatile one. They can play on the counter when they want to. They can keep possession really well when they want to. Enzo Fernandez, yes, is a big loss and changes some of the things they do in build-up, but they have Gonzalo Ramos, a great striker, scored a hat-trick at the World Cup. You've got one of the best left-backs in Europe there. You've got a solid midfield too now. You've got Rafa Silva performing really well. João Mario having the season of his life. Like we say, the goalkeeper is decent. Antonio Silva, an excellent defender. Sure enough, Otamendi makes mistakes. They have great players. It's a good, solid team. Reminds me a little bit of that Monaco team who reached the semi-finals of the 2017 Champions League. Basically, if they don't get all the way to the final, then that's kind of what you'd expect. But this team is good enough to do something special. And if luck goes their way and they get the right teams in the draw, who knows? I don't. But I do like watching them. They're very good. And that's Benfica.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.